Hello, good afternoon. Hello and welcome in the name of Hau, Hebbel and Ufer, in the name of our artistic director, Annemie van Lackere, and from me, I'm the curator for theory and discourse here at the Hau, and I'm here to say a few welcoming words. We are very happy and very honored, Tatiana, that you asked us to do this symposium here at the Hau. Because the objectives of the symposium, I think, resonate a lot with what we're trying to do here at the theater. So for years, we're trying to open the theater, to make it a public space where society can debate subjects in other ways, maybe, than the ways it is possible in media or academia, right? And we gather here multiplicity of voices as our guests, and like this, we realize when times are shifting. So, you know, we work with artists that are in exile here in Berlin. We work with feminist activists and performance, environmentalists. We work with human rights lawyers. We have this series on justice that is actually dealing with human rights, international law, etc. We work with media and digital media artists. We have a digital stage, the Hau 4. So we host international artists, journalists, theorists, and we perceive at the present moment this sense of being alarmed with the world, being alarmed with authoritarian tendencies, with fascisms, being alarmed with war, militarism, inserting and also deepening in our societies. And of course, we have to stress out here in Berlin, we don't live in a totalitarian times, but still we feel the pressure. We feel the pressure on independent judiciaries, on civil society, on the free press. We feel how journalists are persecuted more and more. We feel how activists feel themselves surveyed or are surveyed more and more. We see this new series, yet a new series of wars unfolding. We see how AI weapons are tested in real time, and we have little knowledge on what basis this happens, under which rules this happens. And that is why I think this symposium is at the right time, in the right place. And of course, not only as a moment of historical knowledge, as you also say, historical reflection, but because all these amazing people, this courageous, this brilliant people came here to Berlin, and I'm very grateful for that, to this stage, to infuse us with the legacy, the spirit, the experience of WikiLeaks, to strengthen us for the future. And as a space of art, of course, we try to enhance the potential of art in this art between testimony, archive, and a prefigurative imagining of other worlds, right? And I think this is what we have in common, Tatiana, this interest for the overlaps between art, technology, and politics. And that is why I'm very thankful that you're here. And I want to say a warm welcome to Tatiana Bazzichelli and the Disruption Network Lab.
Also, I would like to thank you, Margarita Tsomou, for this really warm introduction, and Annemie van Lackere for having us here at Hau 1. And also I feel to thank all the team of Hau, Hebbel and Ufer. We have been working together now for many months, so really thanks from the deep of our hearts from the Disruption Network Lab.
Nice. And I will shortly introduce Tatiana and give you the stage. So Tatiana, you know her. We go back some decades when Berlin was still in the making, I would say, in the 2000s. So you're the founder and director of Disruption Network Lab. You curate the program, you research and also pick the annual themes. Your work focuses on digital culture, art and whistleblowing. You were a curator at Transmediale Festival from 2011 to 2014, and yes, you founded the Disruption Network Lab in 2014. What is the Disruption Network Lab? 2 words. It is an ongoing program of events and research focused on the intersection of technology, politics, and art. The focus is to amplify the voices of whistleblowers, human rights activists, journalists, artists, enable them to share research and projects with thousands of peers through affordable conferences, meetups, and workshops. So we are part of this long series of conferences over the decades. For the past 12 years, you have organized almost 40 conferences and 60 meetups internationally, accessible to global audiences, local communities. So the focus of work, of course, is digital rights, information technology, warfare, secrecy, surveillance, and resistance. For everyone who would like a German translation, there is a German translation. You can go and pick up your devices outside, or the symposium will be in English. And I say shortly also, for the intermissions after this panel, you can go to our foyer upstairs and have a drink and wait for the second panel. And we can all go for food after the last panel in the restaurant and bar of the Hau, which is at Hallisches Ufer 34, is the parallel street. From here we can go all together like a demonstration. So thank you from me, and Tatiana, have a great time at the symposium. Thank you.
So finally we made it. I'm so happy to be here. Also quite touched because we have been working for this conference now for 2.5 years. And I feel that this conference is really a wonderful moment in which we are coming back all together. Many of the people that are invited these days are also part of the Disruption Network Club history. And so I really feel warmly to thank you for being here. It has been a challenge for many, despite Berlin airport strike, doing multiple trips with plane and train and cars. So we are all here, and I say a big thank you from my heart. Also, I would like to thank our funders, the Hauptstadtkulturfonds, that is the Capital Culture Fund of Berlin, the Riva and David Logan Foundation, and also special thanks to the Wow Holland Foundation for the cooperation. And I feel to thank deeply also my team, the team of the Disruption Network Club that has been working months and weeks for making this happen. Thank you. And so this is 2026. That is a year that marks the 20th anniversary of WikiLeaks. And I want to go a bit back in history and remember what were we doing in 2006. That time was a moment in which we were, many of us, fighting for freedom of information and also fighting for freedom of the press, for digital rights. Many of us were part of movements, and many of us were discovering the internet. And I still also want to quote, information wants to be free. That is the motto of the hacker ethics for a Congress of 1984. That inspired me a lot, also inspired the way we shape the Disruption Network Club. And in all this context, around 2006, then WikiLeaks came to life. And I mean, I'm not the one, of course, representing here WikiLeaks, but I want to say from an external perspective, WikiLeaks in that time when started gave us a sense of agency, a sense also that we finally could discover a different kind of journalism, a journalism that was giving information to the people and for the people. And in that sense, could us feel that things could change and all we could have collectively achieve the right to know. But we already knew as well that the path was not easy. There were already many of us that were fighting censorship and also surveillance. And already, for example, speaking about the anonymous entity and the trolling culture, there were already people as well in that time that were trying to expose a system of power and injustice, as also WikiLeaks was doing, but in a different way. And we already started to see also at that time that there was a moment of persecution that started also with the people that were part of Anonymous and the people that were part of a movement working with digital rights and culture. At the same time, in these years and slightly later, we could see that the sense of hope that we all had brought us as well to witness very courageous acts of whistleblowing. So I really feel here to mention the work of Chelsea Manning, because she has been one of the biggest, if not the biggest, source of WikiLeaks, and she did a lot also for all of us to give us information that were exposing war crimes. But not only Chelsea Manning, of course, Edward Snowden, many other whistleblowers that we will also have here during these days. I want to thank them all, because I know also through all these years of friendship with many of them, what means to be a whistleblower, how much difficulty you have to go through, because this persecution never stops. So I really want also to give a big thanks to the whistleblowers that came here today. And what is left of the spirit of the 2006 today? And even this sense of optimism, in the sense that we have, although we, as I say, many experience oppression and persecution already, but there was a sense of hope, also playfulness, of the idea that we could really change the things. I would say that we should of course, notice that in the past 4 years, we have having several wars. You know, in the past 4 weeks, one war after another. So not to mention Ukraine, Gaza, Lebanon, Iran. The things are going on and on. And so what is our role here? What are we doing? I feel that, of course, with the conference, we cannot change the world, this we know. And also many people told me, why are you even doing this conference? You know, people that feel we got enough of, you know, oppression, persecution. How do you think to change things? And then I would say, yes, of course, we are not changing the world with this conference, but it's very important that we are all here today, because I still believe in the right of the people coming together to expose a system of power and injustice, and to expose war crimes and all the crimes that are surrounding us that keep going on and on. And so, yes, we are here finally at HOW for 4 days in which we will have several panels happening. Panels also that are very important because they reflect deeply on what has been the impact of WikiLeaks today, what is the impact of the leaks, why they are still important today to understand the present and also to imagine the future, because this has been and is WikiLeaks, something that allows us to navigate and understand the powerfuls, and also fight back in different ways through forms of whistleblowing, form of activism, form of digital fights on the internet. And I think that to be all together here is something very special. So in the next panel conversation that we will have, in these days we will discuss war, surveillance, secrecy, and new paths for action and resistance. And I also made an effort that, of course, is not exactly like that, but these panel conversations are structured according to the different leaks of WikiLeaks. So after this first panel, that is called The Reasons Behind, in which we will discuss why WikiLeaks came to life, what was the spirit around it, and what is the importance of it today. Today we will have another panel called War and Military, and from tomorrow we go on with government and diplomatic cable, intelligence and cyber surveillance, global economy and corporate secrets. And then at the end, I also thought that it was very important to have a panel about art as evidence and resistance. That is something we have been doing a lot as part of the program of the Disruption Network Lab. And this idea of imagining the resistance and action and tactics for the future will also go on Sunday. I invite you all still to register, because this is something we will do in another space, Stadtwerkstatt, that is close to Alexanderplatz, and we will go collectively together among members of the audience, the speakers, artists, activists, to discuss what do we imagine for the future. The same day, we will also have a card game session, WikiLeaks, and I really want to thank the Institute for Dissent and Data Love for doing that. Also, the game is for sale at the entrance. Help this collective, very happy to say. And I want to remind that we also have an online audience. So we are on streaming today. It's possible to interact with us. So for the people that are following us on streaming, you should go to the website disruptionlab.org if you are not there, and you will see on the page of the conference there is a chat, and in this chat you can ask questions. And so through a team member of us, Savannah, we will then ask the questions at the end from the online world, and this will happen for each panel. So we also give the possibility to everyone to participate. And so I want to conclude this opening speech by saying thanks to all the people that came a long way here today, and also all the people that contributed to make this happen with the work and passion. And also want to thank Julian Assange and the past and present WikiLeaks team, and all the volunteers that work for WikiLeaks, that they were really a lot, that worked on the project for inspiring us all. Thank you. So now we start with the panel, The Reasons Behind, and I'm very happy to introduce the speakers and invite them here on stage with me. So I start introducing Stella Assange. Please all join. Stella Assange has been very close to the project of WikiLeaks, working as a human rights lawyer. She is also a member of the legal team supporting Julian Assange, and that support Julian Assange, and also very close and of course, I would say affected personally as the wife of Julian Assange for all this story. So I'm very happy to have you here and also to discuss the reasons behind WikiLeaks. And here we have Renata Ávila Pinto that works since the early times of WikiLeaks as the legal advisor and also volunteer. And today she is the CEO of the Open Knowledge Foundation, and also an expert of openness and digital rights. And then Sunna Ævarsdóttir. Yes. She is an Icelandic politician, human rights lawyer, and journalist, and also the global director of the Courage International. She is also the author of the Council of Europe report that classified Julian Assange as a political prisoner in 2024. And Chip Gibbons, that is a journalist and researcher, expert of the history of FBI, political surveillance, also whistleblowing, and the impact of the Espionage Act on press freedom. So thank you all for being here. So what we want to discuss today is the philosophy behind the WikiLeaks work, the importance of leaks and their impact, and also the role of whistleblowers on the civic society, and the importance, I would say, also of a social movement. And since, we are speaking about the reason behind, I feel it's also important to quote Julian Assange, because, he has been the one that created WikiLeaks. And he says, "When I founded WikiLeaks, it was driven by a simple dream, to educate people about how the world works, so that through understanding, we might bring about something better. Having a map of where we are lets us understand where we might go. Knowledge empowers us to hold power to account and to demand justice where there is none." So, Renata, I will start with you. And you could tell us a bit what was the context in which WikiLeaks started, and would you also define WikiLeaks as a social organization?
So thank you, first of all, for having me here, and to give a little bit more of context. I know I see many familiar faces here, but I guess that people online might be very young people who were not even born when all this happened. I feel a little bit like the grandma now talking, but it was a very particular moment when all of this happened. First of all, only 20% of the people in the world had connectivity, and smartphones were a new thing. More or less 18% of people in the West had access to a connected smartphone, and they will spend on it maximum 30 minutes, 1 hour a day, which is hard to think. I was looking at those details. It was a very different space. But many interesting things happened. And I want to throw to the audience a provocation here. And I think that it goes very well with the opening of the quote of Julian. This was not, it was never, at least I didn't jump in because of being a journalist project or something to improve journalism. WikiLeaks was always something more precious and ambitious than that. And it saw from the very beginning the problems of journalism. And it was not a patch to it. It was actually a new architecture where we could exercise fully our right to freedom of opinion and expression. And I think that it takes us to this very special moment in history where a new network public sphere was being configured. So we could seek, receive, and express information and opinions in a completely different way. So instead of the capture, the market plus military capture that we have of that space today, what WikiLeaks was doing was taking advantage of many factors, such as the lower cost of infrastructure, the speed and time where we could seek and receive information, the collaborations, and because something that is very important to say here, that WikiLeaks was built upon similar infrastructures, similar decentralized networks and collaborations that were happening at the same time, using parts of free software from the MediaWiki, using parts of the infrastructure of the Tor network, using and following the methodologies and the dynamics that were flourishing thanks to these factors. And the goal was very ambitious because what it wanted it departed from a very important principle, that people are smart. I am tired of reading every day in the news that people are ignorant, that you have to, be a very paternalistic attitude in all these studies of misinformation and disinformation and so on. And WikiLeaks was just the opposite. It departed from the decentralized ability of informed citizens using their skills, their local knowledge, and their experiences to reach a stronger scrutiny that it was configuring something more powerful than any intelligence agency, more powerful than any journalist room, because it was relying on the collaboration, it was relying on not negotiated truths. So the premise was, if you have access to the full information that people do not want to see, and if we analyze it all together and you contribute to this analysis, the result will be like not the breaking news that the next day are forgotten, but something more permanent. So I would say that if I was to define, you asked me if it was a social project, I would say that was the pioneer on the alternative network public sphere that we are still waiting for. And it offered just this permanent, uncensorable knowledge commons as one of the components. The promise still delivered that the information published there, because it was so persecuted, it was so hard to, it was so challenging to keep it public and published, that architecture of uncensorable documents is still a promise that is being delivered. Also, the idea of a library or a repository of that information that you need to make decisions, and that's one of the aspects that I'm going to refer later on, the permanent value and the only increased value of this library. But it was also, it was challenging us for a new way of discussion and forming opinions based on facts and local knowledge, and based on different perspectives, but in a very different way than we see today in these commercial platforms that push scandal over substance. And something that was very important is it was a reproducible infrastructure. It was something that it was replicable, scalable, localizable, and built upon, as I said before, on infrastructures that were to a great extent built by volunteers with with a very varied skills. A collective project, really. The vision, I mean, it was Julian's, but the delivery of that vision was thanks to not only, researchers, not only journalists, but a collective of people that I wish I could, I wish I could name, but I cannot name because there were so many, and they were so everywhere, and they were so not focused on the me, like you see everybody today building a person and a brand, the personal brand, but focus on delivering something that was very powerful. So just to answer that was the thing, like volunteering and being part of something large and being part of something impactful was what was driving this collective force. And yeah, it was quite magical in the technical architecture, the methodologies of collaboration, the using of math and knowledge to protect the vulnerable, and the innovation of a way to expand our rights instead of only being at the defense, expanding the idea of access to knowledge and information, and not just fixing the broken journalism that we had then.
Thank you, Renata. And now we'll pass. Yes, please. I want to pass it now to Stella and ask you, from your own perspective, what was the context in which WikiLeaks came about, and also why the persecution has been so strong? I mean, you have been also very close to Julian Assange. You witnessed also personally all the situation in the high security Belmarsh prison, so you can say a lot. So I would like to ask you, starting from your own perspective, how did WikiLeaks came about, and if you can tell us more also about the persecution.
Sure. WikiLeaks came about, as Renata said, to revolutionize and democratize information at a time when it was technically possible to do so, and pioneered new methods and new principles of using primary documents which would evidence war crimes in a concrete way, which could then be used by newspapers and the media and human rights workers and so on to bring accountability. And this was a real break with the past, where principally the media had a gatekeeping role and sometimes did this function, but more often didn't. So there was the technical aspects and the principle of big archives and of using primary documents and cryptography to protect sources and so on. And this ultimately led to what some commentators have called the WikiLeaksization of the press, because after WikiLeaks created the model, then the New York Times, the Washington Post, and so on, they copied it at the same time as they tried to denigrate and bring down WikiLeaks itself. And the point here is that WikiLeaks did it best and is the gold standard, continues to be the gold standard, never exposed a source, and had the greatest impact. And this is why the persecution against WikiLeaks was total, because the WikiLeaks model is the most effective. And it goes beyond traditional journalism to actually bring an effective accountability to power. What WikiLeaks did from the beginning was to, as you say, expose war crimes, but also to drive the point that concealing a crime, concealing a war crime, for example, is a crime, and flipped the logic and called on whistleblowers to expose what they knew about the crimes going on within their institutions and so on in a secure way to the public directly without the gatekeepers, sometimes in collaboration with the gatekeepers, but that there was a direct channel to the public. And the establishment reacted in the way we all know what I said, total persecution through cutting off WikiLeaks finances. WikiLeaks is funded by the public, so the banking blockade through Visa, MasterCard, Bank of America, and so on. The first organization to be shut down in this way. At the time, it was not, it was unheard of to be deplatformed. And you had Visa, for example, I think it was Visa, allowing donations to the Ku Klux Klan, but not to WikiLeaks. And this was an attempt at financial censorship that made it very onerous, for example, for Julian to be able to fight on other fronts, on the legal fronts, which were very expensive, and it was a way to try to cripple Julian and bog him down in WikiLeaks. But it didn't succeed, and this is one of the things that I think is important to emphasize here, that yes, Julian was the canary in the coal mine, but the canary survived, battered, and he was persecuted. He was a political prisoner, and he went through endless persecution, but he came out of it, and there are lots of lessons to be learned from that.
I still want to have a couple of questions for Renata and Stella, and then we expand the perspective to Chip and Sunna. Renata, you also in conversation that we had, you mentioned also that there was a big shift from the moments that we all described, the beginning of WikiLeaks, and instead what happened after the biggest release in 2010. Would you like to tell us a bit more how you experienced that and what this means?
Yes, actually, preparing for this talk has been a big trip in time. I had to go back to documents, press reports, and my own emails. And I discovered many things that were new. I was surprised to find. And I also discovered patterns that I haven't seen before. You know, when you are not under pressure and you have the time to look into documents and so on, it is very interesting. One of the things that I noted when all the reports around Julian and WikiLeaks are positive until more or less June 2010. But what is very interesting and is important to remember and is something that is not told many times in the story. The Pentagon was watching WikiLeaks and was probably had Julian and the team under heavy surveillance since 2008. Actually, there's a report, you can find it online, where the threat was identified, people knowing too much it was the threat, people knowing too much and being able to action what they knew about wars, what they knew about corruption, was something that people in power didn't like. So he was a person of interest since early than if that report was produced 2008, probably the moment that WikiLeaks started publishing, it was already being monitored. And as we know, after the Snowden revelations, they targeted surveillance over him and everything he did. But it was only around that time when, and something happened around that time. And what happened around that time is that media got involved. Because before it was unmediated publication. And powerful media with traditional back channels to government got involved. And I think that media, many media organizations, especially the most powerful, the higher up intermediaries, got really uncomfortable with this honest proposition that, you do not negotiate the way that you release truth. You publish it and you act on it. And personal attacks started, personal attacks, criticizing the person who was a hero and someone really well regarded by civil society organizations and so on by then. When he was publishing about extrajudicial killings in Kenya, and when WikiLeaks was publishing about, they started not to like it that much when they started publishing about, Swiss corruption, financial corruption, but it was still okay. So this change in the narrative is incredible, and the complicity and the resistance of powerful media organizations, and the direct complicity, not debunking, but amplifying very nasty characterization of WikiLeaks as a terrorist organization, as a reckless, raw organization without any evidence, and actually knowing that it was quite the opposite, is when it shifted. And it shifted it's very interesting to see the big bad actors of today, how they were involved. One of the first leaks when Anonymous, made available how Palantir and HB Gary were involved in all of this. I think that HB Gary now is part of Accenture. So, the big bad actors of yesterday are the ones, the even more big actors of today. They were offering, blackmailing as a service, basically. Blackmailing and destruction of WikiLeaks as a service to a corporation, not to the FBI, not to, going into the most unethical profiling that you can imagine. And it is interesting to see how when we see, for example, how people like Francesca Albanese or the justices of the International Criminal Court are being attacked, is by the book what they did with WikiLeaks, technical infrastructure, financial infrastructure, and destruction of reputation. And it was, if you have the time and you read that presentation of Palantir, the nastiness that they suggest as steps to destroy WikiLeaks is the playbook of today, and what makes me very, very, very angry is how we, as citizens, we as organizations, and I would not include me because I actually was quite active on the other side, but many people that should have known better fell for that, and how effective was mainstream media to be at the service of the most powerful instead of being at the service of truth and justice. And of course, there are exceptions, there are exceptional journalists that did their work, but there were two ways that this could have been. One way was to fight back on the side of WikiLeaks and to leave aside this, renounce of being the intermediary of the powerful to deliver some truth to the people. And the other way was to side with the powerful and destroy the possibility of a networked public sphere that was truly democratic that we had at that moment. Now it's obviously too late, and all the problems that everybody is complaining about today, the disinformation, manipulation, blah, 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 could have been, killed at that moment. Extrajudicial financial censorship, attacks on infrastructure, all of this. We had the case to fight back. We had this little opening in time, and it was a missed opportunity. But the lesson here is, did we learn? And are we going to, fall for the same the next time?
So I will pass back to you, Stella, if you also want to elaborate more on that, because of course, the persecution has been a lot and the oppression has been a lot, but I remember also when we were discussing for the preparation of this panel, you also told me that you had the wish not to focus only on the persecution and the oppression, but the importance also of the civic society that fought back, and you experience it with a larger community that supported Julian. So would you like also to tell us more about your experience in these years and the importance also of the global community in fighting back?
Sure. Just to remind people about the timeline here, Julian lost his freedom in December, on the 7th of December 2010. Which was exactly 1 week after Cablegate started getting published. And then he was initially in prison for 10 days, then under house arrest for 1.5 years. Then he went into the embassy for 7 years, and then he went to Belmarsh High Security Prison for over 5 years. And he was finally released on the 24th of June, 2024. So he literally lost his freedom and under increasingly inhuman and degrading circumstances over the course of 14 years. So this was a very hard and long journey. And there were obviously low points where it was difficult to kind of punch through all the propaganda and so on. And the lowest point was probably when Julian was kidnapped from the embassy and taken to Belmarsh. There had been a relentless and orchestrated campaign against him, including with completely fabricated stories on the front page of The Guardian, its most embarrassing moment, I think. And there are quite a few. But as I said, Julian was the canary in the coal mine, but the canary survived. And how did the canary survive? And it came down to the public building the kind of pressure that created the political space to resolve a political case. And it's really significant for us being here in Berlin, because a lot of that mobilization and effective campaigning took place here and in Germany. I think it was really a model to follow. And yes, conferences don't change the world, but there are a lot of people who have changed the world in this room right now. And I think the lesson that we should take from there is that anyone can change the world. And in fact, many of you and many people watching probably were part of this changing the world and literally freeing Julian. Here in Germany, there was a very effective and creative grassroots campaign, decentralized, and one of the things that were very encouraging for Julian when he was in prison was to see the vigils that were held every week here in Berlin, in front of the US Embassy, around Germany, in small towns, and the German campaign social media would post these vigils, and he would, and this would reach Julian, and this was incredibly encouraging during the dark times. But the effect of this grassroots campaign was to kind of bubble up, and so this led to some celebrities and people with public profiles to then get involved, and celebrities and the media, and then eventually politicians, because they also understood there was a profit there to be made. But ultimately, it led to Olaf Scholz himself coming out in, I think, March 2024, so a couple of months before Julian was released, saying, and I'm paraphrasing, that he hoped the British courts would protect Julian, and that 175 years, which was a potential sentence, was a death in installments. So that wouldn't have happened without the grassroots organization, and the grassroots organization also. It came from. Well, it came from, you start at zero, right? And it takes time, but you build over time. And this building over time, we saw something very similar in Australia, where eventually the Prime Minister and the Australian government played a key role in releasing Julian, but it wouldn't have happened without this grassroots mobilization. And another thing about this campaign is that there was both the visible side of it and also the invisible side of it, which was that individuals were just writing directly to politicians, to celebrities, to organizations saying, what are you doing about this? And that invisible kind of action, I think, is incredibly effective as well. And frankly, we don't know the full extent of it, because it was decentralized, because people took initiative and acted locally and used their influence to individually, according to according to their own abilities and positions and so on, to affect the people around them. And that's how we got here.
I just want to highlight something and commend also the effort of the WikiLeaks team in spite of all this persecution. And, you know, like people like Sarah Harrison, Jacob Appelbaum, Joseph Farrell, and many people who were, like, you know, near also endured, like, intense persecution, investigation, threats of interrogation, and so on. And also, you know, like a big number of invisible volunteers that kept WikiLeaks going and publishing for a long time, and donations from the general public, you know, like in spite of the unprecedented attack, together with the campaign, I think that something that was very powerful was that this ability of keep going, and is something that the most powerful group of governments in the world couldn't stop. It, of course, it stopped somehow all the innovation, all that could have been, but the collaboration and the courageous collective that kept WikiLeaks going is something that we need to celebrate and look back and celebrate again, because it was very, 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 very courageous.
Now I would like to pass it to Sunna, and also with Sunna we had a lot of conversation to prepare this panel. I would like to ask you what was the initial inputs of WikiLeaks for your work, because you were already active in the public arena in Iceland, and also already working on the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. And you mentioned to me that the diplomatic cable confirmed what you expected. Would you like to tell us more about this?
Yes, thank you so much, first of all, for having me here in this beautiful theater, and it's great to be here with you all tonight. So, I mean, initially when WikiLeaks comes out, I am still a student, and I am kind of even more radicalized than I was before, if you consider being against war crimes and covering them up being very radical, which I think still is sort of an image that we are given on a day-to-day basis that we should believe, which of course is utter nonsense. But at the time, I shared the hope and the dream that Julian had with the beginning of WikiLeaks, that having this information would enable us to change the world, that it would propel this more just world. But what it did do, even though we didn't get a more just world out of it in maybe the sense that I had hoped, was a confirmation of a lot of things that we knew already, but didn't have concrete evidence of. So we knew there was a lot of war crimes in the Iraq wars, in the Afghan wars, and we knew that they were covering it up. We knew that there were secret detention sites. The Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe had already issued a report in 2006 or 2005, if I remember correctly, about the secret detention sites. And the diplomatic cables confirmed the existence of these prisons and the complicity of European governments in these war crimes. And when I was taking my first steps in the public arena in 2014, they were a great resource, because this is around the same time that the American Parliament, the American Congress, sort of itself admits that there were these secret detention sites, and there was some public debate about this in Iceland. And the diplomatic cables confirmed that there had been conversations between the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iceland and the American authorities, where the Minister of Foreign Affairs is sort of calming down the Americans, saying, no, we're not really investigating this. We're just pretending to investigate so that the left doesn't make too much of a fuss. And so I used these cables to write an article saying this investigation, because our Prime Minister at the time in Iceland, I'm from Iceland, our Prime Minister at the time had said we should look into these allegations, into whether or not Iceland has been used as a landing site for prisoners being sent to secret detention sites. And I said this investigation can't be the same whitewash as the last one. And I pointed out that if Icelandic officials had been involved in any way in the transport of prisoners to secret detention sites, these people would have been complicit in war crimes. And war crimes don't have a statute of limitation. And this is something that I think for us that, maybe tend to lose hope sometimes, need to remember. There are people as old as 93 years old right now being prosecuted for war crimes in Belgium because they don't have a statute of limitation. And this scared this official in Iceland, and she came and said, oh, no, this was totally a very good investigation that we did, and this is nonsense. But we have the facts in front of us, though, and we still have the law, and the law does state that there is no statute of limitations on war crimes. So I think we should take that to heart in the sense that we still have all of this evidence that WikiLeaks uncovered, and there is still time to bring those responsible to justice, even though they haven't as of yet.
And Chip, since we are also speaking about this discourse in relation to war crime and the importance of WikiLeaks in exposing this, when we also discuss together before coming here, you were mentioning me that also for you, WikiLeaks confirmed what all of us have been said, and you mentioned the importance, for example, of collateral murder video and the anti-Iraq war movement. Could you also tell us a bit more of the context in which you were when WikiLeaks came about?
Yeah, let me just start by saying, there are two types of censorship. There is, excuse me a minute, official censorship. This is when a government classifies information, or when they try to put a publisher or journalist in jail for revealing it. And there's also unofficial censorship, where the media refuses to talk about something even though they don't have sort of a gun to their head, quote unquote. There's been really powerful journalists throughout time who have spoken truth to power, who have challenged war crimes, who have challenged surveillance. Julian Assange, obviously, I.F. Stone, Seymour Hersh, I'd say right now in the United States, Seth Harp. But there's also been people who are stenographers, people like Judith Miller, who helped to sell the wars. And in the run-up to the Iraq War, the American media, and I believe media elsewhere, played an incredibly shameful role, not as acting as a check on power, not as fulfilling the promise of press freedom, but as acting as stenographers to help the Bush administration and the Blair government make a fraudulent case for a war of aggression. And when WikiLeaks comes on the scene, I'm in high school at first, I'm later in college, I was quite young, but I had been organizing against the Iraq War. I had been doing events with Iraq veterans where they talked about what they had seen in Iraq, things like we saw in the Collateral Murder video. And I would point out that when Collateral Murder was released, and in the US, we always have this big discourse like, WikiLeaks hurt our troops, they hurt our troops. Two members of the unit that were involved in Collateral Murder came forward, and they had already been active in anti-war activism, trying to tell people what was happening, and they were thankful that video came out. It didn't hurt our troops. It helped those brave men and women who were trying to alert the American public about what we were doing in Iraq, where we were occupying a country and carrying out routine war crimes. So WikiLeaks is so excited because the media had been so pathetic on this issue. And I would be remiss if I don't mention that a lot of these issues are still with us. We have a genocide, I'm allowed to say the genocide in Gaza going on right now. We have a war in Venezuela. We have a war in Iran that I'm upset to admit that, my government is carrying out. And obviously the feelings of Americans about what their government's doing is not the story here. It's the violence against civilians. But I live in Washington, D.C., and everywhere I look, there are anti-war posters in the heart of American foreign policy. The people are very against this. And our government is not only ignoring the will of our own people, they're going around the world and trying to coerce other governments, which I am so ashamed that we're doing, into joining this horrible, horrible war. And WikiLeaks really reminded us what journalism is and what journalism can be when it speaks truth to power as opposed to acting as stenographer, what journalism can be when it reports on the realities of war. So WikiLeaks was important because, as we've all said, it confirmed things we knew, but we didn't have the direct proof of them. And when the WikiLeaks cables came out that show the U.S. government trying to pressure Spain into not investigating the killing of a journalist by U.S. soldiers, when they showed how U.S. soldiers had killed a family and then called in an airstrike to cover up that crime, it showed that what we were talking about with the war was true all along. And of course, if the media had listened to the Iraqi people, if they had listened to the American veterans, we would have known that already, but we discount certain voices. But here we had it in the US government's own words, what was really happening. And we had in the collateral murder video, one of the most horrific things I have ever seen, although there's a collateral murder every day in Gaza now, just this video where we saw people treating war like a video game and rationalizing killing, murdering human beings. And I really appreciate that WikiLeaks called it collateral murder, because if people don't know this, collateral damage is the euphemism that governments use for civilian casualties. And they're not collateral damage. They're human beings who are murdered. And WikiLeaks really put the conversation back where it needed to be. And I had so much hope in the media for the first time in a long time when WikiLeaks came out. Which is why they tried to destroy it, right? Like, let's not kid ourselves. That is why they spent 14 years torturing Julian, doing the payment process, blockading, and all of that stuff, because we had real media for the first time, and God knows when.
And soon I would like to ask you to answer to it, because I know from our conversation also that at the moment you are working also on the case of Francesca Albanese and the sanction on her. You mentioned before that war crimes don't have a state of all limitation, and we can speak about complicit war crimes. So can you tell us a bit more also something about the present, still on the connection of the discourse we are having here about what we learned from WikiLeaks?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. I mean, I think what has already been addressed to some extent by Renata is that we can see this, when I was in politics, I used to call it the silencing handbook. And the case of WikiLeaks, I think, is incredibly illustrative of how this is used. You can see it in how they reacted to the collateral murder video, in the sense that they show parts of the video to a Reuters executive and try to trick him into thinking that something else happened that didn't happen. The extent that they went to cover up that initial crime, the lies that they fabricated to cover up that initial crime, but then, of course, also just the level, the sheer density of crimes that they covered up in Iraq and in Afghanistan and in Guantanamo, and the list goes on. Just the level of secrecy and lies and propaganda that were fabricated around all of these crimes to cover them up. So what WikiLeaks exposed was how, first of all, the American government commits a lot of war crimes. American soldiers commit a lot of war crimes, and the American government covers it up almost all of the time. So we cannot trust the American government to tell us the truth about what they call collateral damage or anything like that, because they don't tell us the truth about it. And the media isn't really trying to uncover the truth about it in a very sincere way either. So it uncovered this whole fabric of society for us, that the justifications given to us about the ongoing wars at the time were lies and propaganda, and that a lot of crime was happening that nobody was being held accountable for. Now, the key element of the playbook of the powerful is to shoot the messenger. And WikiLeaks is, of course, a prime example of this. You have a messenger that is shot. So are the whistleblowers, of course, that bring these issues to light. If we take the collateral murder video as an example, the only person that has ever been punished for that is Chelsea Manning. So there the messenger was shot. And of course, Julian Assange, who published the video. And scapegoating. Scapegoating is another tool of the powerful to continue with their crimes unabated. You do that first by attacking the character of the person that you want to scapegoat. You do so relentlessly, and you do so in spite of all of the evidence to the contrary until it becomes truth, because the media and people that just want to live a comfortable life and not challenge power or authority too much start to just sort of acquiesce to it, because it's more comfortable and easy than actually standing up for what is true, because you just see the sheer level of power that stands between you and the truth, and it becomes easier to relent and say, okay, your version of the truth is a better truth than the one that I see in front of me right now. And you can see this playbook playing out now with the genocide in Gaza, the relentless lies that we are being told about what is happening there, the persecution and attacks, the sheer level of effort and power that is being put behind silencing people that speak out for the people of Gaza is incredible to watch, with all of the evidence, with this mountain of evidence that we have on the ongoing genocide in Gaza. People who talk about it as a genocide are still decried as crackpots or as dangerous. And Francesca Albanese, it's good you mentioned her, of course, is the prime example of this. She's been the focus of, first of all, an incredible defamation campaign against her personality. I mean, she's been called a witch by public officials. So, you know, speaking of a witch hunt, I think is just a quite adequate term for what is going on. And then, of course, she's been sanctioned by the United States government for assisting the International Criminal Court, of all things. Just like judges of the International Criminal Court have been financially sanctioned by the United States. And because of the lack of independence of Europe, this has a monumental effect on their daily lives. They cannot receive payments, they cannot have bank accounts, they cannot make reservations, they find it increasingly difficult to travel. And when it comes to Francesca Albanese, the powers in Europe are not willing to stand up for her. Their own citizen, a UN mandate holder that enjoys immunity according to the UN Charter, and she's not being defended, not by the UN and not by Europe. And I think it shows us what a precarious place we are in and how effective these measures are. But what WikiLeaks left us with is a catalogue of these methods. It is evidence of how they do it, and we have a really clear trail to follow on exactly the methods that are being used to silence people. And it's always been my belief that if you understand the methods that are being used to lie, to cover up the truth, and to attack and kill the messenger, it's our only way of uncovering the truth and protecting the messengers.
And Chip, since we are speaking about protecting the messenger, I wanted to mention that recently you and your organization were working on a really important bill in relation to the Espionage Act and the fact that so many people, including Julian Assange, has been convicted under the Espionage Act, a lot of whistleblowers. Can you tell us more? Is very important that he's taking the name of Daniel Ellsberg.
Yes. Yeah, it's an incredible moment. For almost 110 years, the Espionage Act has been one of the worst laws in the United States. The laws that allow for sanctions against Albanese are also very, very awful. But the Espionage Act was passed during World War I. Woodrow Wilson, I'm not going to go through a whole 100 history, but Woodrow Wilson had run for president saying he was against wars, and then he got us into one. Who's ever heard of that happening again, And then he immediately started trying to put people in jail for criticizing the war, and they used something called the Espionage Act of 1917 to do it. It's a very broad law, and it has many moving pieces. The pieces that were used to put people in jail, including a former member of Congress And then he ran again and he got elected, and they said, we won't seat you because you were convicted under the Espionage Act. Then he ran in the special election, and the people sent him back, and they said, okay, you can have a congressman now. As well as a presidential candidate who then ran from jail for saying things like, I think the president is a tool of Wall Street, wars for rich people, working people fight them. Again, who can imagine such sentiments still being relevant today? But then in the 70s under Daniel Ellsberg, they took another part of it that sort of covers the communication of what they call national defense information. And if you're wondering what national defense information is, that's a great question. It's not defined by the text of the law. The Supreme Court has refused to define it. They've stated it's for a jury to decide what something is or is not national defense information. But under a separate law called the Classified Information Procedures Act, the jury is not given any information about what the so-called information is. I have no idea how a jury can determine whether or not something is this undefined term, national defense information. But it criminalizes the retention or communication of it, and it doesn't apply to just those with the duty to protect secrets. It doesn't distinguish between spies and journalists. It does not even distinguish between journalists and members of the public. If the New York Times publishes the Pentagon Papers story, and you share it on Twitter, there are people in the U.S. government who believe you have broken the Espionage Act. And the Espionage Act is unfortunately no longer just a U.S. problem. It is a horrible problem for us when we put patriotic government employees in prison for upholding their oath to the Constitution. But with the persecution of Julian Assange, we've decided to globalize our regime of oppression, and we're now saying that if you're a journalist in another country with no connection to our country, we can come and find you and drag you to our country and disappear you into a dungeon for printing the wrong thing. But thankfully, Representative Rashida Tlaib, who was the first member of Congress to send a letter to the Biden administration, I think it was, calling for the charge to be dropped against Julian. Other people joined in later on, but she was the first, and she deserves credit for that. Has introduced a bill that I helped write called the Daniel Ellsberg Press Freedom and Whistleblower Protection Act. It's named for Dan because he supported these things when he was alive. Unfortunately, he passed away several years ago. And it would amend the Espionage Act so that it would only apply to those who have a duty to protect classified information. So not Julian Assange, not me for tweeting about WikiLeaks, not you for tweeting about WikiLeaks. And when they wanted to bring a case against those types of people, government insiders, they had to show they intended to harm the U.S. And that is a very high burden. Let me tell you, Chelsea Manning was charged under the Espionage Act, and she was charged with aiding the enemy, a capital offense. The government said by putting information out on the internet, people could read it. Those people could be bad people. They could be bin Laden. She's aided the enemy. And a military judge, rejected that charge, which military courts are not beacons of due process or great procedure, to put it mildly. But even for the military judge, this was too much because she didn't have the intent to harm the country. And much more recently, there was an individual who the government was trying to put away for a long time for being an alleged WikiLeaks source. And the government said, this person intended to harm the U.S. That's their claim, not mine. And this is the first case we've ever charged under the Espionage Act section we use against whistleblowers where that person had that intent. Therefore, you have to compare them to other cases that aren't at play here, right? According to the U.S. government, only one media source prosecuted under the Espionage Act had the intent to harm the U.S. Everyone else had what the U.S. government calls a misguided sense of altruism and a misguided sense of public interest. I don't think they were misguided at all, but nonetheless, they're admitting these aren't harmful people. And we would require them to prove that person wanted to harm this country, and we would give them an affirmative right to testify because when Dan Ellsberg tried to take the stand in his own defense, he was told he couldn't answer the question, why did you copy the Pentagon Papers? More recently, there was a whistleblower in the U.S. named Daniel Hale who exposed facts about the U.S. drone program, and the government filed a motion. I don't think it ever got ruled on, but they filed a motion asking that Daniel Hale's lawyers could not mention before the jury, and I am quoting, his good motives. So this bill would limit who the Espionage Act could apply to, and if you somehow got around all of that, you would have a fighting chance in court to show a jury. And it is important for a jury to get this information, right? Imagine you're a juror, you're told you have an Espionage Act case, you say, oh, it's a spy for China, or it's a spy for Al-Qaeda, and you say, no. It's this guy who saw the NSA was breaking the law, and he gave the information to a journalist, and the journalist got a Pulitzer Prize, and a court said the program was illegal, and Congress changed the law. You're not going to convict him, and they know that, and that's why they stack the deck. And this is a really important law that if it was to be enacted, obviously we are very, 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 very far away from it passing. But 5 years ago, people were telling us, don't even introduce long shot bills because there's no point in trying to reform the Espionage Act. Many of those people, I won't say their names, are now supporting this bill, okay? And they are very much of the belief that this is what is going to move the needle for an eventual reform.
I would like to also go back to Renata and Stella and specifically mention the discourse of what is the impact of WikiLeaks today, and connected to what Chip was saying. For sure, we have to mention the importance of WikiLeaks in challenging the architecture of authoritarianism, in really challenging the way we perceive and get information. And from Stella, I think would be interesting to understand also from your side, how do you see and interpret all the debate on the Epstein's file today? And what's the connection also with the impact of WikiLeaks today? Is there even a connection? So maybe we start with you or with Stella? Okay.
Sorry.
The mic.
Well, the impact of WikiLeaks today, I think we can't really have this discussion without talking about the elephant in the room, World War III, which I fear has started. We're in a situation where there is a lot of censorship, intimidating the public to, for example, not name the war of aggression and the two states that are the aggressors here, that have initiated an extremely dangerous situation which we now all find ourselves in. I don't know how much it's been debated in the German press. I know that Axel Springer has a contract with all its employees where they sign an oath to the transatlantic relationship and to Israel specifically. So there is a structural problem here where such a big player, not just in Germany, but I believe they've also just acquired the Telegraph in the UK, has this muzzle on its workers. We have a situation where the Secretary of State of the United States, Marco Rubio, basically admitted that Israel got the US into this, and the UK intelligence services have leaked to The Guardian that they consider Kushner and Witkoff Israeli assets, and that they misled President Trump on the true situation, on the true state of negotiations with Iran. And the insiders, both the Omani official and the UK intelligence official who was in the negotiations, who have been dumbfounded at what has happened. So this is the backdrop for, even this discussion about exposing crimes and how the public reacts to what is clearly a runaway situation where the press is censored. And as Chip was saying, collateral murder was a massive breakthrough because the public finally saw what was actually happening in Iraq. a war crime on video, you know, their own documented war crime exposed thanks to Chelsea Manning. Obviously, with the genocide in Gaza, the documentation of that has been direct through social media as well, and suppressed as well, because the Twitter and so on have suppressed the evidence, shut down accounts and so on. And TikTok has been basically expropriated after Netanyahu named it as the front line for Israeli interests on shaping opinion around the wars of aggression in the Middle East. On the one hand, one could say, well, there are collateral murders being published every day, but on the other hand, well, those collateral murders have actually translated into galvanizing a whole generation, galvanizing the public into directly understanding what's really going on. The fact that it hasn't translated into policy yet is a different issue, but it's not like these things don't have an impact. I just want to briefly mention the Epstein files because I find this very interesting, whereas the evidence of war crimes has kind of become ubiquitous. The Epstein files, it's a different context, obviously. These were published by the US government, but they were published under pressure, well, through legislation led by Thomas Massie, a supporter of Julian's, who has also has a huge public support to get these documents out. 3 million documents have been published. Now, where does this come out of? You know, why do they think that? Why does the public pressure the U.S. government into publishing these files? Well, this is the WikiLeaks model. This is the archive, and you have the public basically being Indiana Joneses of these documents and finding information that has brought down Peter Mandelson, for example, in the UK, who I don't know if you know who he is, but he is like the power behind the throne, not the throne literally, but the Starmer throne, and has been for decades a major player in the UK, and obviously Prince Andrew and so on, and there must be many more. But the point is that the public, basically plumbing through these documents, has taken the role that it's kind of information that is shared laterally and having a major impact. They're not waiting for the New York Times to report, partly because they won't. And in fact, the New York Times published an editorial saying that the Epstein files should never have been published. But the point is that the success and the impact of the Epstein files, I think, is the biggest since Cablegate, basically, because it's structural and it concerns global power. Epstein was obviously a power broker, and this is basically proves the WikiLeaks model.
Thank you, Stella, and I think this is really the important point to do a final round among us, especially speaking about the WikiLeaks model and also the discourse of challenging the architecture of authoritarianism and what WikiLeaks taught us.
I want to refer to precisely that. Mm-hmm. And now, the interesting thing is not to get too much into the Epstein rabbit hole. We have accumulation of files. The interesting aspect of this is the living library of the most persecuted documents, that is WikiLeaks today, can be actioned, can be activated. We can put the next layer of documents, we have now tools that we didn't have in 2010. We have the ability to use the tools that we have today to go a step beyond and just being informed but to be from informed to being strategic and active. We can analyze and understand better, fast, how the powerful work, and be very strategic on which are the weak points, which are the openings, which are the areas where we can action on. And I think that's the interesting moment. The accumulation of the Epstein files and all the files that WikiLeaks had give us a historical picture and also a more or less accurate picture of patterns of behavior, of points of interest, and also weaknesses of the ruling classes that are now, controlling resources, profiting from the wars and destroying the planet. So it is up to us. What do we do with that information? And I think that it is not up to the press, it's not up to the institutions that took us at this point. Unless I'm more cynical, on political parties, the president. We need to design a new infrastructure of possibilities, and we have the tools to do it. And I believe that all the people, the friends of WikiLeaks and all the volunteers have the courage to do it as well. So I would say, let's act on it.
And Chip and Sunna, what do you think about?
Well, I'd just like to say that, the reason that Julian was persecuted in the way that he was and the level of attacks levied against him also display the huge effect of his work. And the same goes for these kinds of methods that are being used now to silence those speaking out against the genocide. Attacking Francesca Albanese for helping for what Marco Rubio calls lawfare, as if she's, because she wrote some United Nations reports about complicity in genocide. She named names of companies and governments that are complicit in genocide, and so she is guilty, according to Marco Rubio, of lawfare, like it's some kind of warfare against the United States. And she is designated as a threat to the economic interests of the United States. This one woman with her glasses and her reports, And I think that shows that she is a threat to them, that they perceive her as a threat, because what she is doing is working. She's documenting the crimes, and they know, like we know, that war crimes don't have a statute of limitation. And they don't like their crimes being documented, and they don't like their crimes being exposed and published for the public record for years and years to come, so that once they're out of power, which thankfully Trump eventually will be, and all of his little minions as well, and they will be exposed. They will be exposed to being tried, because yeah, they will. So attacking another sovereign country is a war crime as well. It's the crime of aggression. It's something that we really want to try Putin for, but it's something that we really should try Trump for as well. So they know all of this. So yeah, I think we should remain hopeful and just remember that we will try them at some later point.
And Chip, I would pass it to you. What do you think is the WikiLeaks lesson for the future in this kind of conversation we are having?
I think the lesson from WikiLeaks is the power of journalism when it's done right. I think, we saw so many people get it wrong in the media. We see so many people get it wrong in the media now. But something like WikiLeaks that shows us when we bring the truth to the people, what can happen is, I think it's the lesson. Unfortunately, I also think there's a lesson about repression, which is that when you take on the U.S. government the way Julian Assange did, WikiLeaks did, by simply publishing truthful information that every people had a right to know, but the American people especially had a right to these documents, right? Because these are crimes committed by our government in our name that they were hiding from us. They will come after you. And I think that's why we have to make sure that when Trump leaves, we don't do what happened when Bush left, right? Everyone was very upset with George Bush. They talked about him the same way they talk about Donald Trump. And Barack Obama comes in. We don't get rid of the Patriot Act. We don't get rid of the NSA surveillance. We don't get rid of the Espionage Act. We don't get rid of the new FBI guidelines that I won't bore you with, but allow very bad types of investigation, that like Hoover type stuff. We expand the drone war. And now Trump is in office, and when we look at the types of repression he's engaging in, it's all stuff that's made possible by the long-term trajectory of the U.S. national security state. He's not making new laws. He's not claiming new powers. He's using what's already on the books. So I think in order to defend WikiLeaks, in order to defend democracy, we do have to put people on trial for the crimes they've committed. But we've got to actually finally pull apart the tools that allow them to do this. We can't do a Barack Obama 2.0 after Trump, where someone comes in and says, I'm against this, but I keep everything the same. It has to actually change this time.
So I think now is time to open the question to the audience. First, I want to thank really a lot the panelists. Let's make an applause to all. So now is up to you. Let's see who is the first question. In the middle, thank you.
You're right. Who raised your hand? Right there.
Good evening, and thank you all for this fantastic presentation. I wanted to go back to something that Renata Ávila Pinto said at the very beginning. You mentioned that the original strategy or spirit of WikiLeaks was about rejecting the paternalistic idea of an ignorant public and just giving the tools to everyone to make their decisions. But of course, now there is a counter-strategy to that has been expressed by Steve Bannon, among others, who said, we need to fill the infosphere with so much sewage that no one will be able to tell truth from lie anymore. And effectively, we can see now that most people who are now exposed to war crimes, being streamed live 24/7, or to the worst of the worst of what can be suspected or proven about our politicians, journalists, military leaders. The vast majority of the population is disengaged, burned out, incapable of telling truth from lies, or all three. So do you think there is a counter-strategy to that at this point when the information is in the states that it is now today?
And this is a question for everyone?
Okay, so I absolutely believe that is we have to try many counter strategies. We need to be very experimental about this, because the problem that I see today is the reception and neutralization. Like, you know, we do not know what information is reaching people, and we know that is brain tired of being exposed to, like, you know, there's a limit to cruelty that, you know, just is a mechanism shut down in the exposure of so much injustice. And by design, fragmentation, what I talked initially of the network public sphere, does not exist. We have privatized silos controlled by corporations and by the military. So the counter strategies, that are many counter strategies, involve different actors than the usual actors. I forgot to mention when we were discussing this, the incredible role artists played in saving Julian Assange. He will not be free without this, you know, using these alternative avenues that were not the obvious to expose the injustice of his imprisonment. I think that we need to look at these kind of actors, you know, like activists, scientists, artists, scientists, physical spaces, and local action. I mean, it's a combination of different strategies to break with it. But something very interesting is also fight on courts. For many constitutions in Europe and all over the world have the right to seek and receive information without interference. One can argue that we cannot exercise that right fully. And so I think that we could find mechanisms to reclaim that space, and to reclaim that space is guaranteed, and that space is not reimagining social media or reimagining journalism. It's creating something else. So I think that it is a combination of tactics, and it is something that we can, I mean, I don't want to be preaching like be uber positive and so on, but it's something that it's not that we need to start right now, even at a local scale, you know, and we can tackle one issue at a time. And we can start, like, you know, starting with small steps in breaking this, you know, doom scrolling and being depressed and being fragmented, and walk away from the broken building of technology today, and really going back to the original WikiLeaks culture of building our own spaces and holding the conversations in our terms. We have the tools. Nobody is forbidding us of using and adopting those tools. We need the discipline, we need the will, because as Stella was saying, as you were saying, you know, the situation is pretty bad. And silence or inaction is not an option. We are very privileged. We people watching this and sitting here are very privileged. So let's use our privilege and our very, very, very active brains to do something, and experiment, share, restart if it doesn't function. I think that on Sunday there will be a lot of workshops around that where we can move from bluff to action. Mm-hmm.
Well, I just wanted to add that although, yes, we are bombarded with this slop, we can call it now, of bad information right now. Something that has changed that I think is quite significant is the demasking of the sort of colonial imperial machine that drives the world today, which I think it's funny because like a year ago I was in politics, and I'm around a lot of politicians, and then I'm an international lawyer and I'm around a lot of international lawyers, and a lot of them have this desire to go back to the past. They look at just 10 years ago when we could all pretend like this was all legal, you know. At least they pretended, you know. They were like, they made up excuses. They were like, it's a preemptive self-defense. That's why we attacked Iraq, you know. And that it was nice. At least they tried, you know. And this is what people say over and over again, like, well, at least they made some excuse for the war crimes that they committed, right? That was great. Can't we go back to that? And I think it's actually great that we don't do that anymore, because now we are faced with the sheer hypocrisy. Like the incredible, we can see it, it's laid bare. So we can see when Trump attacks a sovereign state, removes its leader, parades it in front of the press with Maduro and Venezuela, and talks about taking all their oil, and all of the European leaders go, oh yeah, it's so great that we're going to have democracy now in Venezuela, you know, wonderful. And we look at them and go, what are you talking about? And then all of a sudden Trump's attention turns to Europe, and he says, I would like Greenland, please. And what happens to all of the European leaders then? They're like, the principle of sovereignty is holy, and we care about it very deeply, you know, and then all of a sudden sovereignty matters to them. So we can see this charade so clearly now. We can see that they only care about it if it matters to them. And I think it's quite valuable. So yes, you can sort of bombard us with some slop, but at least now we can see it very clearly, and we don't have this time anymore where they make up excuses. They're quite clear about what they want. And we can see that the European leaders are still very much desiring this old time where they could pretend like everything was very nice and legal, but they don't have that anymore. And I think that should also give us hope.
So, over there and over there. Thanks. Mm-hmm. So, yes, you are reaching. Good.
Yeah, thank you for the panel. I think it was quite important that, of course, you've talked a lot about the US, which is the main imperial colonial power right now, and that is stylizing itself as the world police that makes laws that count for all of the other people who don't have a say in them. But it's not, I would like to pull attention to the fact that it's not just the US that is actually sanctioning journalists or like sanctioning people. So here in Europe, Hüseyin Doğru, the founder of Red Media, was sanctioned by the European Union, leaving him completely with no money, and effectively also his wife and his 2 children, who are both under 1 year old, like his two infant children, they have no access to money. And that has happened allegedly under the claim that he was spreading Russian disinformation. But in reality, we look at the facts and we know that it is because Germany is suppressing reporting on Palestine, and that was what Hüseyin Doğru and Red Media were doing. So what do we, maybe first of all, like, what's your response to this and the fact that it's not, it's coming to Europe. Europe is not, it's still kind of claiming, especially some people now are claiming in an opposition to the US, they're like, oh, the US is kind of going crazy, but like we're the rational ones actually. And you can kind of see that with Germany, that it really wants to make itself like the sort of next hegemon. But what do we do against these sanctions and attacks on journalists that are happening right here in Germany, right here in Berlin?
If I can take this one as well. So I've spent quite a lot of time in Germany. I actually also spent a whole year studying law in Germany. And what I remember very clearly from my time then was this never again mentality that came over and over and over again in every lesson where we were being taught about the rule of law and the importance of the rule of law, was that the Third Reich wouldn't repeat itself, that the kind of injustice that was enacted then, the kind of repression that was legal then, wouldn't repeat itself. And I'm not saying that we're there, just to be very clear about that. But what I have noticed and what has deeply concerned me about what is going on in Germany at the present time is the level of repression that is being enforced here when it comes to Gaza, when it comes to Israel. You have the former Greek Minister of Finance being banned from speaking at a conference which I believe was called Peace in Palestine, from coming here, a European citizen. So I think they saw that that wasn't the best way to do it because he can challenge that for the courts, and it's probably not going to go so well for the German government or the Berlin authorities, which I believe are responsible for this decision. And so a journalist like Hüseyin Doğru, whose case I'm familiar with, he is sanctioned by the European Union for spreading discord within the Union, which is, I think, give or take the title. And what should be really concerning to all of us, regardless of what you think of these accusations, is the fact that he has to prove his innocence. And as a lawyer, I can tell you this is the fundamental principle of the rule of law, is that it's the government's burden to prove that you're guilty. It's not your burden to prove that you are innocent to the government. And so what these sanctions do is they reverse the burden of proof. And this is what should concern every lawyer, every concerned citizen, anybody that cares about having rights in a democratic state, is that this has essentially been overturned in Europe, and you now have to disprove that you are guilty of something. And that should concern us all. And I completely agree with you that it is most likely because of his coverage of how protesters for Palestine are treated completely differently to other protesters in Germany. And I find it also very worrying that the media hasn't really been covering this case in the way that they should be. So thank you for bringing it to the attention of this panel. And I think it's going to be important moving forward to watch this case, and also to pressure both people here, people in power here, to do something about it, but also to follow the proceedings at the European Court, which I believe is the place where this is taking place.
So there was someone up on the balcony.
Thank you very much for being here. It's really an honor to have you in Berlin, and I wanted especially to thank Stella for mentioning the grassroots movement that was done here in Berlin for Julian. And I wanted to connect to that and to honor that as well. And maybe ask you back, what could it be right now that we could do to address the World War III that's going on right now? So you were mentioning the little people doing little things and having big effects, and I feel this is so important, I think, to honor this, and what ideas maybe you could share with us, what we could do in this situation right now.
Thanks for that. I was hoping to get that question because I had written down some ideas. I think there are lots of lessons that we learned along the way through the campaign, and how it built over time to become truly global, completely decentralized, and hugely impactful. And there are some things that, in hindsight, maybe could have been done more effectively. And it's useful to look back and apply it to the real world now, and the issues that concern us, as we've been discussing here. So I think that the first thing is that you always basically start from zero, and there's no set roadmap. You try things, and some will stick, and you find people, you find allies, and you go from there. It takes time, but if done right, it's an accelerating process. You have to think about picking your target. You shouldn't pick immovable objects. You pick the most powerful object that you can move. For example, Amnesty International eventually became an important advocate, but there was a lot of groundwork that was done there through members, through people within Amnesty and so on, through Amnesty seeing that other organizations were taking the lead and they were nowhere to be seen. And Amnesty International actually was one of our strongest allies towards the end. But that was a powerful, movable object. Similarly, major players in the media. So, like, picking, I don't know, the Attorney General of the United States, I think that was an immovable object, and also he wouldn't act in response to pressure. That's a political problem for him. So you have to think about the internal dynamics as well in relation to protests and how you can push people in the right direction. So another point is always speak to people in their own language, appeal to their own interests. And in this campaign, it also meant speaking to different groups with different interests. And I think what was surprising and effective and very successful in this campaign was that it managed to get together a huge coalition across different parts of politics that all could converge on the position that Julian should be released for all sorts of reasons. So in Australia, for example, and Australia is very close to the US, and they always want to be seen to be a great ally of the US and so on. One of the reasons that eventually politicians from all the different parties came on board was, well, the Assange case is becoming a thorn in the side of the US-Australia relationship. It's becoming a problem for us, you know, because they want to be close to the US. This is not the same message that you're working with when you're talking to, you know, the grassroots or celebrities and so on. But you have to find and meet people where they are and boil things down to the essentials. Make individuals accountable. Institutions are made up of individuals. And that's where this invisible campaign, I think, was very effective. We heard anecdotally people within, you know, like comedians in the UK or so on that were complaining about being harassed by people who are supporters of Julian and saying, why aren't you saying anything? You have a public profile, you have a responsibility and so on. This is incredibly effective. And also people within institutions, like they take the decisions. Institutions are not these, you know, they're not living entities. So targeting individuals, holding them accountable, appealing to, you know, their responsibilities and so on is also very effective. Also, each individual has their own relationships and means of influencing others in their vicinity, and it's impossible to generally answer this question, what can I do? Well, I have no idea because I don't actually know what you can do. Maybe you're, you know, the brother of or the cousin of Trump or something, and I don't know about that. But of course, if you were, then I would have some specific suggestions. But so everyone has to like think about themselves and okay, who can I influence? My cousin, my students, and so on. And that's how you the invisible side of campaigning. Relentlessness. I think this campaign to free Julian was relentless, and this was what really demoralized the other side, that it was decentralized, impossible to control, you know, vigils in tiny towns that then appeared across Twitter and so on, and it was really effective, this relentlessness, and eventually the relentlessness is what led to the success in freeing Julian. And opposing war can bring together a similar coalition of people from across politics, you know, because I think everyone probably realizes by now that we're all in the shit, and that nothing good can come out of this situation unless we organize. Yeah, last thing is everyone says it's impossible until it's done.
Can I just add one thing, which is that, you know, where do we direct our energy? I think it is really important that we protect the messengers, like I spoke of before. And I'd just like to say, you know, watch this space. Courage International will start a very public campaign to pressure the EU to protecting Francesca Albanese. And we will do that by pressuring them to enact what is called the blocking regulation. I know it doesn't sound very exciting, but it's quite good. And just keep an eye out, because we will be mounting pressure on the EU, and we will be asking them and calling them to account why they're not protecting their own citizens.
There was another question on that side before.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey, hi. Thanks for organizing this. Putting all of us in this room is really wonderful. Thanks for the panelists and your words. Renata earlier said that WikiLeaks sprouted in the fertile ground of, should we call it the dream of a free internet back then. It seems somehow like this parenthesis may be closing down. Most people access today the internet through devices that don't really belong to them, through software that is distributed by some company somewhere in the US. It seems, to quote some wise people in our crowd, that we lost that war. And my question builds upon maybe the first question that was asked. And to everyone on the panel, if somebody here in the room or online is, say, 20-something years old and wanted to start the next WikiLeaks, what would you tell them? What would you advise them to do maybe differently that was done then? What were the lessons learned along the way that you would convey to them? And what sort of concrete help would you offer to them?
We have only 5 minutes, so this... Probably with this question, there will be a lot to answer in the next days, but still, I would like to give the possibility to answer. So who wants to go with that?
I have been thinking about it a lot, and I think that one of the main principles is technology is an option, and it's not the only way to build it, but whatever technology or technique that we build it upon needs to be simple, long-lasting, and ours. Simple in the sense that we don't need to overcomplicate or over-engineer something decentralized and resilient. Long-lasting, I think that one of the problems that we had in all the experimentation is that there was new project here and there popping up and then dying out. And so if we build something long-lasting and resilient that can grow gradually and that can, be like planting seeds, like somehow, as opposed to launching rockets, is the way that I will see it. And I mean, this is very abstract, of course. I guess that something that is very important that we learned on the way is the diversity of expertises that you need in building it, and the shared principles that you need to have with that people. And lastly, think of it not of an initiative or an exclusive club, but an ecosystem where different people play different roles. I have seen it in, in the structures of resilience in Gaza, now in Beirut, being bombed and so on. Like it takes some people to collect the truth, some people to prepare the food that will keep the people collecting the truth going, some people to care for other infrastructure. So I think that it's yet to be imagined. We have all the elements, and we have many possibilities that we didn't have before. We have the sense of urgency, but as the Zapatista said, we need to, the way to I'm misquoting the Zapatistas, which is a terrible thing, but we can, to go fast, we need to go slow somehow, like we need to go step by step and with care, and we need to think on the long shot, yeah. It's very abstract, but sorry. It's what I have in mind at the moment.
Thank you, Renata. And I feel Also, I would like to hear the voice of Chip in these question and answers, especially because you are part of an organization that defending the rights and dissent of people. So would you like also to give your perspective here?
Well, I don't think I can advise what the next WikiLeaks should do. Though I will note many people from WikiLeaks are sitting in the front row and are with us still. But what I can say is I can give the advice for what the rest of us should do. We should be prepared to defend them. We should be prepared to defend the source. We should be demanding governments, whether it's the European Union and Francesca Albanese, whether it's the US and the Espionage Act, change their laws so that people who speak the truth cannot be penalized for it. And we should be prepared for when the next WikiLeaks comes or when the next Chelsea Manning comes, not to fall for the lies, not to get discouraged, and from day one be like, if you tell the truth, we will stand for you. So for those of us who aren't going to start the next WikiLeaks, we need to be preparing to defend the next WikiLeaks. And again, WikiLeaks is right here in the front row.
So now there is also the moment to hear the voice of the online crowds, and I will pass to Savannah the microphone to read to us 2 questions together, because we don't have so much time.
2 questions, all right. So
yeah.
Probably the first ones. What does Stella think of newer actors that are claiming to do the work of WikiLeaks? And for everyone, could you comment on the use of hack and leak tactic being used by state actors? The fact that it's becoming a geopolitical tool. And then maybe I will also have the second person. Exposing crimes is now treated as a crime more than ever before. Are the members of WikiLeaks aware of that? Our European government, including the European Union and the World Health Organization, are imposing the greatest censorship in decades, and wars are no longer waged only in the traditional sense. Why is this going unnoticed?
Mm-hmm. I mean, the members of WikiLeaks, we will also hear in the next panel, so maybe they will also say. But let's start with the first question. Who wants to answer? About the, yeah.
Well, the idea of WikiLeaks has always been to start something that others can try out. And in a way, I mean, I think what the point I was making earlier about the Epstein files, and this also goes a little bit to your question, although maybe my perspective on this is a little bit naive, but AI has made technology a lot more accessible, and you have people going through the Epstein files, indexing them, mapping them out in a way that was impossible when WikiLeaks, WikiLeaks was doing this in a much more hands-on way, but AI now allows technologists to be able to accelerate this project, the process, and so there's a lot more possibility to have information made interpretable now through these changes. Of course, AI carries a lot of problems as well, and I'm not saying that this is the golden arrow, but things have changed a lot. And WikiLeaks remains the gold standard, and it's great that there are other organizations that continue or aspire to continue the tradition. WikiLeaks, I believe, is the only one that has the stated criteria for publication, which is also something that the establishment media and the gatekeepers found incredibly threatening, which was that WikiLeaks would publish information that it got as long as it was censored and that it was of political, diplomatic, historical importance. And that was the criteria. It wasn't politically driven. If they had evidence of criminality or of wrongdoing, of ethical importance, then that was information that was that fit the criteria. Obviously, we know that the establishment media don't, or they, you know, they make certain claims. Look at the Washington Post, but they don't publish their criteria because obviously they suppress a lot of information. So I think this is probably what sets WikiLeaks apart, and it's also why WikiLeaks got attacked from all sides, from Republicans, from Democrats, etc., because WikiLeaks followed the criteria and is not positioned politically. It is wedded to the truth, and that's always going to be, you know, what's special about WikiLeaks, and you know, others, if they want to aspire to also publishing criteria and doing the same, then great. But yeah, WikiLeaks remains unique in that aspect.
You want to say?
I want to add something that it was asked on leaking and hacking by the states. I mean, one of the things that WikiLeaks show and even publish is all the tools that governments have to do it all the time. And it has been normalized. I mean, it is very different, and it is a powerful actor with the complicity many times of companies, and many in collaboration with other governments and intelligence agencies doing it against citizens. Something that was terrible that happened recently that you can add to the list of war crimes to be prosecuted soon is, for example, the weaponization of the pagers that injured children, and it was horrible. And it's been normalized that we no longer, you know, like we cannot trust all the devices. We have never trusted fully, but now more than ever, you know, it is something that can be weaponized against civilians, things around us, and how vulnerable we are to that is something that is worth an entire panel in itself. And the opinion of that is, of course, is weaponizing information against the public. And something that I wanted to say as well is that actually the WikiLeaks model would, if WikiLeaks was actively operating, it is getting very complicated on a difficulty that I'm seeing, and that will need new brains and and techniques and ways is on the credibility, veracity, and validity of information, and the speed of spreading information today, because veracity and validity of information is, with AI and with synthetic creation of content, is getting very complicated, especially in limited resource context. And it's something that we will need to face. And it only goes back to what it was mentioned on AI. We cannot rely, I mean, there was institutions that were mentioned as the ones that are censoring the most. And actually, I will dare to say that the biggest censors today are not necessarily like the institutions that are doing it visible, but the invisible curation of content and suppression of content that is going on in the way that we seek information today. We don't know, and there's no way to know. There's no way to know. Even now with the people asking to AI, whatever, we don't know the curation process and the suppression of content and points of view that we are being, subject to. So the next phase will be like to take a disciplined approach on going, and it's not going back to the past. It's actually getting back the autonomy of seeking information and accessing the full documents to inform ourselves by ourselves. Ideally, not alone. Ideally, in community, because that's what we need to challenge today. That's the real censorship. What is not what I am forbid to say by an institution, is what I'm not told.
Oh, thank you, Renata. I also feel that this is a perfect way to finish this panel, especially mentioning the discourse of AI. Here at the Disruption Network Lab, we have been working now since various years with fellows that are researching the impact of AI on warfare. So in a sense, you say, what is the next level of AI? I think we are witnessing in front of our eyes the way they are also using AI to kill people. So this transition us to the next panel that I hope being the subject on war and military, we will also discuss about that through the lens of the leaks of WikiLeaks, what has been done in the past, what is happening in the present, and what we will see in the future. So I would like to thank all our panelists, Chip, Stella, Renata, and Sunna, and all the audience online and here at HOW. And we will come back at 8 to then experience the next panel, War and Military. And you are also welcome to stay, because the room will be open, or you can go to the bar, but you can also still stay here in the room. So thank you, everyone, and see you next.